Inventing Reality. Section: The Cold War. Anti-communist propaganda was muffled during World War II, as the United States found itself allied with the Soviet Union against Nazi aggression. But with the war's end in 1945, the long-standing anti-labor, anti-communist, and anti-Soviet attitudes of government, business, and media once more came to the fore, with dire warnings about Soviet plans for, quote, world domination, and the internal threat of, quote, communist spies and saboteurs. In 1947, President Harry Truman declared in his Truman Doctrine that the United States was locked in a mortal contest defending world freedom from, quote, Soviet expansionism, and that huge amounts of American money and arms would be used to fortify pro-U.S. regimes in Greece, Turkey, and elsewhere. The inseparable advances of the dollar and the flag were hailed in publications like Businessweek, with captions that read, quote, New democracy, new business. U.S. drive to stop communism abroad means heavy outlays for bases, relief, and reconstruction. But in return, American business is bound to get new markets abroad. End quote. And the financial editor of the New York World Telegram wrote, quote, All of this is a much safer and profitable state of affairs for investors. It is good news of a fundamental character. End quote. A few newspapers expressed concern about Truman's bellicose challenge to the Soviets. The Chicago Daily News said the United States was, quote, asking for a war with Russia. But the great majority of the press hailed Truman's Cold War declarations with an avalanche of articles and stories about the, quote, international communist menace. As the press continued to propagate the Cold War, downplaying Soviet overtures for negotiation, public opinion responded in kind. In 1945, 32% of the public thought the U.S. would be involved in a new world war within 2 decades or so. By March of 1948, 73%, according to a Gallup poll. In 1950, U.S. News and World Report offered this revealing observation. Beginning of long quote. Government planners figure they have found the magic formula for almost endless economic good times. Cold War is the catalyst. Cold War is an automatic pump primer. Turn the spigot and the public clamors for more arms spending. Turn another, the clamor ceases. Cold War demands, if fully exploited, are almost limitless. End of quote. The real formula for good times, U.S. News was saying to its corporate readers, was big defense spending. It brought huge contracts, guaranteed markets, and the highest profits available. And how do you get the public to go along with huge deficits and high taxes that big defense budgets bring? Turn on the Cold War spigot. Create a state of alarm about the, quote, Soviet threat. The anti-communist witch hunt continued against labor. Faced with high profits, high prices, and frozen wage levels, organized labor, grown to some 34% of the workforce by the end of World War II, embarked on a series of strikes. In 1947, Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act, written word for word by representatives of the National Association of Manufacturers, according to Congressman Donald O'Toole of New York. The new law repealed many of the hard-won gains of the pro-labor legislation of the previous decade. It reinstituted injunctions to break strikes, and the court's power to impose heavy fines. It outlawed mass picketing, secondary boycotts, and the closed shop. It authorized employer interference in workers' attempts at unionizing and, quote, right to work, anti-union laws at the state level. It prohibited unions from ejecting company spies as long as they paid their dues. Owners now could refuse to bargain collectively, even by shutting down their plants, and could destroy union treasuries with expensive court suits. Taft-Hartley also required union officials to sign non-communist oaths. Those who refused were ejected from their positions. Communists who might sign risked perjuring themselves and going to jail. Thus, many Unionists were deprived of one of their most precious liberties, the right to work. With the exception of a few liberal publications, the news media applauded the new law for its anti-communist features, and because it supposedly redressed the power balance between management and labor. Succumbing to pressure from business, government, and the press, the CIO expelled many of the more militant and pace-setting unions from its organization, then launched membership raids against them. As a result, CIO membership declined by 1/4. Burdened by the strictures of the Taft-Hartley Act, a much weakened, divided, and red-baited union movement never regained the momentum and effectiveness of the previous years. The anti-communist witch hunt reached into other areas of life. Government employees and private citizens had their careers ruined and their personal lives and opinions scrutinized by legislative committees, the FBI, local police, and the press. Millions were required to sign loyalty oaths. Prosecutions of U.S. Communist Party members under the Smith Act, state sedition trials, and contempt proceedings gave the United States a growing number of political prisoners. By 1952, 110 persons had been indicted or imprisoned under the Smith Act, about half of them trade unionists. A Democratic-controlled Congress overwhelmingly passed the Mccarran Internal Security Act of 1950. It called for the registration of, quote, Communist Front and Communist Action groups, and authorized the construction of concentration camps for purposes of interning without trial or hearing all suspected, quote, subversives, should either the President or Congress declare a national emergency. Of the 6 camps built in 1952, several were maintained on a standby basis through the 1950s and into the 1960s. The Attorney General and congressional and state legislative committees periodically published lists of, quote, Communist Front organizations. Generally, these groups supported such causes as world disarmament, peace, organized labor, and greater racial and economic equality. Despite these repressive measures, Republicans in Congress and the Republican-dominated press repeatedly charged that the Truman administration was, quote, soft on communism. Truman reacted to these pressures by taking an increasingly bellicose line toward the Soviets abroad, and setting up, quote, loyalty boards to screen the political views of federal employees at home. Such measures did not stop the conservative-dominated press from continuing to fault the Democrats. If anything, Truman's policies only further fed the anti-communist hype. End section.